Hi, this is Paul, and I have an achiever on the channel today. Nick, I first met Nick. He was living up in Reading. He and his wife came down to our local meetup, and that we had some fun conversation then. He's been an active participant on the Discord server. He's an active participant and interlocutor on Twitter. And he pushed some of my buttons, and I basically said, "Oh, you and I should talk about this." And he's like, I won an achievement badge. I talked my way onto Paul's channel on Twitter, so didn't even have to wait for a rando slot. So congratulations, Nick.
Yeah, thanks. I said I successfully lobbied a member of your Consciousness Congress.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Well, why don't we should begin. I'm going to move my camera a little bit. Why don't we begin with your story a little bit, because I think your story is important to talk about what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so I think, being in this little corner of the internet sometimes there's only so much depth you can go into, right? If you're just talking on Twitter or popping in and out of voice chat on Bridges of Meaning, things like that. And so, people can kind of get a quick little snapshot like, oh, you're the Orthodox guy, or you're the charismatic guy, or you're this guy, or you're that guy. So I think with that little snippet, I can just be like the formerly charismatic guy. But obviously with everyone, it goes much deeper than that. And so for me, part of the reason my buttons can get pushed so much and I can be so passionate about certain things isn't merely that, that I was like, that I'm formerly charismatic or something like that. Because with anything, especially now, a lot of people can gain status. You'll see these articles online like why I left the whatever, and it's this big long thing, and they try to be charitable, but really they're just gaining status because they've like left the
another big
thing.
status thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Why I kissed Rob Bell goodbye or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I might agree with that one a bit more, but the more popular ones are like Mark Driscoll, the Mark Driscoll thing, right? Like that's a big one. So just more in the popular culture to sort of relate yourself to the trends of the day.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's not just that black and white for me. I think one thing that might help contextualize my small version of that story is that growing up, I always had this, whatever you want to call it, like this dark cloud hanging over me, these very negative feelings and emotions and inside that I guess you could technically like label as like in the depression anxiety sphere, but I don't like to get too far into that because I've found that if I go too far down that rabbit hole, it disarms me, it disempowers me to do what I can with my cross and with my life. So, but I say that to say,
let's start where you grew up.
Yeah. I grew up in the Midwest in Lincoln.
Okay.
Lincoln. And so Lincoln, town, Lincoln, Illinois, first town named after Abraham Lincoln, was named after him while he was still alive. He christened the town with a watermelon. It's a big deal here. Big deal here. And so anyway, sorry, I was going off on that tangent to say, growing up, I'm going to talk about the church here in a second, but growing up, I'd just be living life. I'd see all these advertisements on TV as like an 8-year-old or 9-year-old. So I'd see Pizza Hut, be like, it'd be like a big happy family and like, hey, get our special deal. But in my mind, I'm connecting, oh, if I get that special deal from Pizza Hut, I too will experience happiness or whatever, So,
which is exactly what the commercial is designed to do.
That's exactly right. And so with that stuff I had going on, being raised up in the charismatic church, I instantly had, and I wouldn't say they were like preying on me or anything but I instantly had that same connection of like, hey, there's all sorts of this cool stuff happening. God can move at any moment and miracles can happen at any moment. So I'm going to get my breakthrough at any moment. And so that's sort of the narrative I picked up on as a kid, and it wasn't really working for me. And so I moved on from that and went and, did the average, like what a lot of kids do. A lot of kids who are raised in church, just kind of went and did my own thing, had like 1 foot in youth group, 1 foot out doing whatever.
Your parents were charismatic Christians.
My mother was.
Your mother was.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you raised in a single family household, or?
No, my parents were together, but my father does not speak of spiritual things very often, or really at
Okay.
all.
And
So
was that true of them when they married? Or did he leave?
I'd say they were both nominal Christians when they were married. My mom was raised Methodist, my father Catholic.
Okay, so then she had an experience, and
Definitely. Yeah.
then went into, was it a Pentecostal church or just a charismatic church?
Those definitions are a little fuzzy. So at the
Okay.
time, it was probably both.
Okay. And because when you were young, you went to church with her because you were a little kid, and Royal Rangers, and I mean, you did all the programs and things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then
Mhm.
at about what age did you sort of walk away?
I mean, it was just never an official moment. I was trying to just always lukewarm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
was never like, never struggled with atheism or anything like that. I was never in any of those camps. It was always just, yeah, I guess it's all true, but it's not working for me. So I'm going
Okay.
to go with this narrative that back to my Pizza Hut example, the larger versions of the Pizza Hut commercial that the culture's saying like, hey, go out and do fun stuff with your friends. You'll find fulfillment or a romantic relationship or things like that. So for me, it was more like, yeah, I mean, I guess I propositionally believe that what they're saying is true, but it's just not working for me. It's not working for what I'm trying to fix, inside. So
Pizza is good, but the image I'm seeing and what it's communicating, that's not happening. Pizza's good, but
yeah,
I don't hit euphoria when I go into Pizza Hut and they
right,
have deep dish with cheese inside.
right, right. Yep. So went to the better pizza commercials out in the world for this analogy. And then as I entered adulthood, they weren't working either, right? They were not. And so I got real disillusioned with that. And so I went back to as I came into adulthood, as I was like 18 or 19, really hit kind of rock bottom with things. And so I was like, okay. And I genuinely in my heart was like, okay, God, I want to do this your way. And at that point, I had a whole script that I was now back into, because growing up in church, you hear all the time that testimony. You're raised in youth group. You hear one of the dads get up at youth camp say, when I was your guys' age, I went and did all this and all that, and then I came back and now life's way better. So that's the script I immediately was going into, but it was a genuine return for me in my heart.
You were sincere.
It really was. And it was more of like a hope and a prayer, like, okay, this didn't used to do it for me, but this is all I got now. And so I did that. I bought in. It's not that I was like lying to myself as much as it was, this is all I have. So they're saying if I go up front and I put my hands up and I really show faith, like I'm going to get more breakthrough. I don't know if anyone actually told me that. That's just what I was picking up on it. If I go to this conference and read this book, and
well, that's the subtext.
Yeah.
All the time.
Right.
I mean, and very common. It's, the reason you haven't attained this level of that which we can barely name is because you were insincere, or you did it wrong, or it was the wrong church, or for what it's. But here in this space, if you follow our program, angels will sing, kingdom will come,
Yeah.
the dead will be raised, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. That's exactly right. And so I bought into those programs. I bought into it and really went into it. I went to a ministry school, like a big discipleship school, which is big in the charismatic world, maybe even in evangelical world right now, of like, hey, come to this school. You're going to be just like the apostles. Like, we're going to go do life just like them. That's sort of the draw. And so, but again, my whole reason for doing this, I was trying to solve these internal negative feelings. That's why I was doing all of this. And because I was craving such security, I wasn't really letting myself ask any questions. I wasn't letting myself doubt. And so the irony is that I didn't really ever doubt anything propositionally until after I really rededicated my life back to God. And so the whole, if I'm not making sense, you got to let me know. I know I'm skipping a lot
No,
of
no,
stuff.
you make, well, and again, to maybe translate, you're doing all this to resolve those internal feelings. And part of the program, especially in certain charismatic circles, is don't let yourself doubt. You pull up that passage from James where, if you look in the mirror and you doubt yourself, well, then you're not going to receive the blessing. And so in other words, the part of the key is to screw up cognitive certainty. And okay, I've got the cognitive certainty, I've got the right church, and I'm going to this place where miracles are happening and they're world known, they're world renowned, and this is where revival is happening. And so I'm getting all of the machinery in alignment, and I'm waiting for it to happen to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it wasn't. And I've since realized part of the reason it wasn't is that I wasn't inculcating like contentedness, like because of that narrative, I sort of had to perpetually find things in me that needed breakthrough. So actually, it's because of what I had going on. I'm not even blaming it on the movement, because I have a lot of Discord guys and I discuss very positive, constructive things about the movement, but the way I was interacting with it was the problem. And so because of that, I didn't hit rock bottom, but I started to deconstruct. And while I started to deconstruct is when I came across Jordan Peterson, who at the same time that the bottom was falling out of what I believed, Peterson's like building it up from the ground up. This guy who's not even sure if he believes it or not, propositionally.
Yeah. Oh, building what up from the ground up? Christianity
for me.
Okay.
He's discussing the meaning of it in his biblical series, things like that. And all of a sudden, it's like I had the container, but there was nothing in the container for me. There was no substance there. That's an extreme version of what I'm saying. I wasn't focused on having this. I was so focused on maintaining the propositions or maintaining, I believe these things, I have to believe these things, that I wasn't even exploring what they meant. And so Peterson is exploring what they meant, not really worrying about whether or not he believes it. That's what I'm trying to say. And anyway, long story short, since then, it's just been a slow climb, hopefully further up and further in. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting the way you framed it. It's sort of like you bought the package and bought the program. You didn't sort of deconstruct or open up the program to see what was actually in the program. You just, on faith, said, here's the program. If I follow the program, I'll achieve the outcomes that I'm desiring. And so then Peterson comes along and basically starts to open up some of these boxes, these black boxes that the program is sort of made up of. And that then you find helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, how, in terms of the experience of it, how do you know you were finding it helpful? I mean, because you talked about that you were, you're dealing with negative emotion. So with Peterson sort of opening this up, you experienced a relief from negative emotion?
No, no. I would say the more existential dread side of things was being helped by Peterson. So I have a very specific example. A lot of people around me were able to debate creation, evolution, that whole thing, no problem. But for me, it was of existential importance, because being raised, I guess, nominally sort of fundamentalist, sort of part and parcel of charismaticism in a lot of in a lot of places. It wasn't just that, like, I couldn't even explore evolutionary claims because it had to be, and this is back in, I have different ways of phrasing this now, but this is like 5 years ago. It had to be, boom, Adam and Eve created right then in a single moment, or or I was just a speck of dust floating in space. So it all hinged on that for me. And so I guess once I listened to Peterson, or what Peterson helped me do is, like, I don't know how it happened. I just believe I'm made in the image of God. I believe that humanity is made in the image of God. I don't know the process that brought that about. So somehow Peterson helped me to get from a sense of existential dread of even looking at all these things that I believed to now I can just look at them. I can explore. I can be okay with whatever is true, whatever reality is. I'm okay with it. It established a more genuine faith in me somehow.
That's really interesting because, it's very, so if we imagine this program, this machine, this manual, how to create apostles, let's say, manual and a program about how to create apostles, not just Christians, not just teachers, but apostles, top level Christians that can do miracles and heal the sick and raise the dead and all those things. But that there was a sense in which that project and that program was fragile. And that fragility, one of the areas of vulnerability of that project and that program was the creation evolution debate.
For me, it was.
Yeah, for you it was. Yeah, this whole project. But if this nagging thought that, well, maybe there is something to evolutionary science and psychology and everything, then suddenly this entire project and program that I have been putting all of my hopes in, well, then that goes out the window, and then suddenly I'm lost.
Yeah.
And Peterson sort of gave you a reassurance that, it sounds like in many ways that, you no longer were relying on that project for something existential in your life, that you started, that it was no longer, you were no longer functioning in that way.
Yeah, I say that before that, I was unintentionally an ideologue. I didn't come to my opinions honestly, but I didn't do it in a dishonest way. It was all I had. The house of cards was all I knew to build. And I'm generalizing too, because there was obviously, genuine moments of faith and good experiences and things like that.
Absolutely. So, but I think that's kind of the mental image that we've sort of drawn together, I think is quite helpful, because you're clearly not alone in this experience and this narrative. There are many people who have been in the same thing. You and I today were going back and forth about deconstruction on Twitter, and for Biologos, for example, which is something that comes out of my tribe. Part of why they want to sort of act as credible Christians validating a sort of theistic evolution is because they are trying to address exactly what you've laid out. But what's interesting to me is that in some ways Peterson did this and to try and figure out what exactly he did. When I early on in this channel, I made some Jordan Peterson commentary videos. People wanted to talk to me. I started talking to people. One of the things I realized quite early on was that watching Jordan Peterson videos relieved individuals of, let's call it, nihilism induced depression. And for a number of people, Job is a pretty prominent person in our little corner of the internet. and I've done a number of conversations with Job. I mean, Job sort of became the poster child for this. And of course, Job went all the way from sort of being a new atheist into now being a Christian in a church in the Netherlands where he's at, and he's reading a ton of theology, and he's always writing me about it. And so obviously a transformation occurred in him, which in many ways is something that Christian community feels very comfortable with and sort of sees Jordan Peterson as an ally. Your story is very interesting in that, in a sense, Peterson himself, and you're not the only one who has come to me and said Peterson himself has provoked a deconstruction of sorts. In your case,
he gave me the courage to embrace it.
Okay.
And I don't mean personal courage, like be brave. He gave me, it's like I trusted him when he said, hey, he never said this. It's as if he said, hey, what you've built, the faith you've built is a house of cards, but there's a there, trust me. And so if you let it fall, if you stop trying to hold it together, trust me, there's something there, there's substance there to build on. It's as if he was saying that.
Yeah. And I don't think he would say that. I don't know that it's the faith you've built. You certainly co-created it, but it was a lot of what implicitly or explicitly had been communicated to you, especially within your particular level of development at that time, because of course the church we go to as a child is apprehended through the eyes of a child. And so for you, this was, part of a process of being able to look at that whole thing and say, I can leave that behind and it's okay. And in a sense, now you can continue to pursue things and ask questions and explore without the kind of existential dread that you experienced previously.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. The existential dread it's over with. It's like Peterson gave me the courage to take the Kierkegaardian leap of faith. But
the faith that you've leapt into is a little different from all of, what everyone had told you should leap towards before. You have,
right.
So, well, let's ask this question. Then the next question will be, what exactly have you leapt into?
I have who knows? I've fallen into the wardrobe, Paul. No, I mean, what I've fallen into is, I don't know, this conversation can go a lot of different ways, because I think this plays in somehow. One of the things that plays into this, it was very impactful to me, was, and this was later on, was reading Owen Barfield's Saving the Appearances. Mm-hmm. And this goes into a lot of what some of the recent conversations on consciousness and things like that. But it helped me understand that, and even Charles Taylor stuff, like there's something that's been completely forgotten and lost. There's a disconnect between us and the pre-enlightenment world, or I don't know where you want to put the timeline. And so I think what I've fallen into is that divide in me started to be that divide of, and so now it's like it's a faith that I'm allowed to keep exploring, and I can't find the bottom. Like something like the incarnation or the cross or the resurrection. It's like you can keep exploring these things and there's no bottom. Whereas before, it's almost like I was given, like, hey, believe these things, and that's it. Like, believe it. Like in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Like, here's your fact. Which I know gets into the whole proposition thing, but it's, yeah.
So, when you lived in California, you were, with that community, and we don't have to mention them. But now you've moved back east. Are you back in Lincoln now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. What provoked leaving that other community?
Well, what provoked it? probably wasn't even anything intellectual. It was more the size. So I could leave and no one noticed.
Hmm.
And so that's more what it was than anything.
Hmm.
Probably
So,
a mega church than a mega church problem,
okay.
size problem.
So what are you going to church now?
Yeah, it's in a Methodist church here in town.
Okay.
The one that my family's gone to for a few generations.
Interesting. Interesting. And, you just did a randos conversation with John on, it was John, right?
Yep.
And that was quite an interesting conversation. I didn't catch all of it, but, I mean, part of what's obviously you've been around the Discord a while, and you've been in this little corner for a while, and you've been working it here too. In terms of what kinds of things are you working on now?
Well, one of the things a couple of things. One thing is I'm always trying to bridge the sort of this corner of the internet, which I think is very productive, to in real life, which is why I used, for shorthand, I say, I got to be able to share some of this stuff with grandma, because that's like the furthest extreme of has no idea what I'm talking about. So it's like, I'm sorry, no matter how much I talk with my grandma, we're not going to be able to share the same language of the 4 P's of knowing. It's not going to happen. It's not like 3 years from now, she's going to be like, I really finally get perspectival knowing. It's like, it's just not going to happen. So that's one thing.
It's like you're explaining the Trinity to her.
Yeah.
I now know
Yeah.
perspectival knowing.
Yeah.
I can depart in peace.
Yeah. So I guess that's more of like an in real life project that I'm doing. But
that's really key though.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's all this talky thinky stuff going on, on my channel and on the Discord in this little corner. But as the conversation I had yesterday with John and Paul, unless this all produces stuff that is fully heaven and earth combined,
yeah,
we're just moving air molecules.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny, right before I got on, I was following a conversation on the Discord of like religio versus credo. Religio.
Was Luke involved?
Of course. Religio, it's like a war on credo over here.
That's right.
I don't think it should be a war on, it should be a war to reorient them in proper order, probably, than to eliminate, which everyone would agree with. But religio, obviously that word that religion comes from, that means to bind. It's like, I just can't stop thinking about that. It's like, I see all these disparate camps within Christianity, and it's like at one point you could have the spirit of those camps all in one place. Like the spirit of Puritanism done right was once a part of the whole umbrella. The spirit behind your young, restless, and reformed, you can find church fathers that perfectly fit, that sort of spirit, that they're out there, cutting down holy pagan trees. And then there's the church fathers who are writing down pagan myths and, getting truth out of that. So you said, this all has to connect. It's like this corner of the internet, has to connect to the real world. Like this might be the edge, but we've got to bring what we're getting back to the center, back to in real life, which of course it's funny that you're sort of the guy that the Discord revolved around, because it's not that you're living 2 lives, but your life with your parish, which you share with us on social media a bit, is so different. Like you get what I'm saying with the whole
grandma thing. I'm talking to homeless people who are repeating themselves and muttering to themselves, and I've got an issue right now with a guy who's liking to light fires right next to the church. I mean, these are, and I want to tinker with the language. I don't want to call that, we're so used to calling that real because it's material.
Yeah.
But my interaction with that particular homeless guy, it's fully this way. It's fully upper and lower register. And that particular homeless guy, in the words of another homeless guy, you can't really know any single of the people in the neighborhood unless you know a bunch of them, because they know each other in ways that I don't, and they rat on each other. So one of my friends said, no, he's a professional homeless guy. This is the art that he has been perfecting for, for 20 years. So, but anyway, no, that's right. And I think your grandmother isn't just merely a physical being either. I mean, it's not like you're going to try to explain, 4P knowing to your Cocker Spaniel. No, your grandmother is a image bearer of God. And a lot of what we're struggling with is that this has to get embodied into a community, because, in many ways, the community that you came out of, that at least with your eyes, you appropriated it as sort of a fragile house of cards, that also was a community. And, these things have ups and downs, and there's corruption, and there's times, and there's rising and falling. There's all these kind of things. But your instinct is exactly right, in that the goal of all of this is not simply right thinking, or even right propositional holding, or even right, attempting to embody by saying, I have to cast all doubt out of my mind, because then I'm going to get the breakthrough that I'm looking for.
Right.
I mean, you're looking to say, I want, it's the same vision in many ways that those from the community that you'd left. I want to live in the center of God's work in the world here and now, but some of the artifacts of that have changed.
Right. Right. Yep. And so, yeah, I mean, and that's a challenge, because sometimes corners, I say oftentimes, that's what makes our corner of the internet so incredible in many ways, is oftentimes corners of the internet can further isolate people. So it'll give you that dopamine, but then you turn the computer off and you're further separated from, those people that you're in closest physical proximity to.
Right.
And I think one thing that makes our corner so helpful is everyone's always like, this has to be a supplement. This cannot be your meal, but it can be a great supplement.
Yeah.
Back to that proper order thing that I was just talking about with like Religio and Credo. It's like, man, if this is a supplement, it's an amazing supplement that can help, facilitate getting some of that good stuff in the physical world that you need.
Well, and part of this is that in this corner, we're not really selling a product. I mean, we're not a shill for orthodoxy. We're not a shill for Dutch Calvinism. We're not a shill for, for Sevilla's, value per sig stuff. We're not a shill for Vaki's religion. That's not a religion. And we've got all of these balls up in the air in a sense, but we are all saying that it is going to need to be embodied. And
yeah, right.
Faces on screens is not embodiment. And to the degree that this has to help us actually connect heaven and earth, that's what we're looking for. The talky thinky isn't an end in itself. Yeah,
exactly. And one example is for the first week of Advent, again, I had so many amazing discoveries as like my worldview began to open up after that first couple of years back, as a dedicated Christian again. And so it's like I would come across things through the internet, like Peterson had a conversation with Pajot, and I'd be like, oh, that's what icons are all about. Like I don't know if I believe that or could get down with that, but that's cool. Like I just thought it was, you get the straw man version growing up, like, oh, they just worship images or whatever. And I also kept seeing the repeated patterns in the church as a whole. It might look slightly different, but it's something about charismaticism in particular. The patterns were so closely resembled, like little things. Like I'd go by an office that I was cleaning and I would see pictures of like revivalists on the wall, and they were looking to them for inspiration to remind themselves how to conduct themselves in the world. And I'm just like, what is going on here, and the real presence of Christ wasn't in the Eucharist, but gosh darn it, the real presence comes when the lights dim and the fog comes out and the skinny jeans hot person starts singing those sweet melodies.
That's right.
But it was real presence. Like they were all about presence. So I noticed all these parallels. And that made me dive into all this older stuff to like, maybe there's something there that I wasn't getting, and I kept discovering it. And one such area was something as simple. I know most people are like, oh yeah, of course. I never knew what Advent was. And so like a few years ago, I started diving into it, and I see how it plays a part in the liturgical calendar. And it's the sort of like John the Baptist part of the Christian story of like, yeah, Christ is coming, but you still need to prepare your heart. And so I gave my family a 45-minute presentation on the meaning of Advent, because we all come from a similar background. And so I had like aunts and uncles and grandparents. And so that was just an example of how I've taken something from this little corner, at least that I got in this little corner, and I'm trying to take it and put it at the grandma level.
Yeah.
Out there. So that was really cool.
It is really cool. Well, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about, I mean, right now in our little corner, there's a lot of, I should probably make a meme, the meme of the dude and the girlfriend's looking at the dude and discuss because the dude's looking at another hot girl. I mean, right now, Orthodoxy is that other hot girl.
Yeah.
And all the other communities are like, what? You're looking at Orthodoxy? And, so be it. But one of the things that I appreciated about a lot of what you bring into this, which is something that, even though I sort of, I poke fun at the smoke machine and the skinny jeans and the, singing love songs to Jesus, that is an astoundingly powerful, we can use fancy Vervaeke words, that is an astoundingly powerful psychotechnology that is in fact doing a lot for millions of believers in Western Christianity right now. Now, I think part of what, I've obviously come at this as a Calvinist, part of what we face in your story, which actually Pentecostals don't really disagree with, even though sometimes they act as if it's not true, is that the presence of God in our lives is always a gift, and you can sing, "Come, Holy Spirit, come," and you can have the best worship leader, and you can have, the best, all of the different accoutrements around us, whether it's praying for a healing or praying that God's Spirit would come and ravish us, or that God's Spirit would come and empower us. God, this is God number 2. He gets to choose. He can come or not come. And no amount of, we have no, we have no leverage by which to manipulate or coerce God, because then he's not God. And so, for all of the hotness that Orthodoxy is emitting right now, and I have absolutely no problem or jealousy. I am not the girlfriend looking at the dude saying, "Don't look at Orthodoxy." That ain't me. I am just thrilled I'm thrilled for a number of things, but I don't want to, I've certainly got critiques of all kinds of things, but I can't look at the church today and say, "Oh, the charismatic movement is just all hooey." To me, that's a ludicrous assertion, even though there's plenty of hooey in it. There's plenty of hooey in my tradition, and there's plenty of hooey in the Orthodox tradition too. I don't know where it is because I don't know anything about them, but I'm not going to bother with their hooey. I got to pay attention to my own.
Yep. Yeah, it really is. Paul Anleitner made a point on Twitter that he was thankful for the charismatic movement because it maintained, it might have improperly maintained, but it maintained a connection, an attempted connection to the transcendent. And it really did. Like, that's one thing that's why I've been able to sort of translate so many symbolic world things so easily. Like a lot had to change, but it's like I had some sort of baseline understanding that I could just go right over, because in even in sermons, like a lot of the sermons I was listening to, like it would take Old Testament passages and then talk about them symbolically. It would do it in a framework that was very modern, of like, God has a plan for your life. And, like the book of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah is telling all the guys to build the wall in front of them. So they'll talk about that symbolic. They'll be like, you just got to build the wall in front of you. You got to do, and it all gets tied into the sort of God has a plan for your life message. But the tool of interpreting it symbolically was there. Like I was listening to it, and there's some really good stuff there too. And then I would hear Pajot talk about some stuff, and I'd be like, there's much more substance there, but that same pattern of interpreting things that way, like I'm familiar with.
Yep.
And so similarly with worship, it's like, well, I grew up, we criticize the smells and bells Catholicism, but then that's exactly what we're doing. And it's not like I want to have a more positive view of it. I'm still a bit cynical. Like I can't really get through a service because I don't trust myself. I don't have any trust there to withstand it, because I threw my hands up and let myself be caught up in the feels for so long. I don't know what's real, what's not for me in that.
Yeah.
But I know so many people, including John, who had like amazing life-changing experiences in that setting, because it is such a psycho.
That's the John you did the Randall's
Yeah.
conversation with, Matt Vervaeke.
Yeah.
A lot of Johns around. We got to make
Yeah.
sure we're talking about, people know which one you're talking about.
And I found it interesting on that note. Jordan Peterson, he mentioned when he went to Liberty University, and they have a big sort of evangelical worship service. And he was so touched because he had never seen a large group of people.
Yeah.
What were his words? Like, engage in unity towards the transcendent, or something like that.
Yeah. He translated it into his own schema there. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was like, man, that's so interesting, the things he's impressed by and touched by sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it makes me give it a bit more, it makes me not dive into cynicism, that can be so easy if you come out of things like that. But
and it speaks well of Jordan that he could recognize that. It's also true, and this is something a lot of Americans don't understand, Canada is far less churchy than America, than the United States and south of the border. And so, whereas for some of us, me going into a mega church or a charismatic church, I've been in these spaces many times, and so I'm very familiar with it. But for someone who has maybe only heard cynical reports, and then to go there and feel the power, and that was part of the things I really got to talk to James Wellman about this more, because people sort of either disparage or malign that power and say it's manipulative, yada yada yada. Okay, but it's huge power. And I know many people for whom that, the worship, as we call it, the worship is, the sermon may rise or fall. The sermon is greatly aided by the power of the worship, because the worship gets them right there to be impacted by the message. And it's funny to me, people, I can, the whole psychedelic aspect of the conversation, the worship it's powerful psychotechnology that just sets us up. And especially if you go into it willingly.
Yeah.
And now again, if you're around it long enough, there's plenty that you can get cynical about. But even someone like T.H. Lerman, who's an anthropologist who has written about this, was embedded in a vineyard community for a while for her When God Talks Back book. She went into it very open-mindedly and just said, well, I'm going to sort of maintain myself as a secular anthropologist, but I'm going to look at this and I'm going to study it, just like if I was studying an Amazonian tribe that wasn't networked into the rest of civilization. So people dismiss it when people dismiss it, they're really not understanding either that, or they're just trying, often for political reasons. Well, I don't like the way these people align with Republicans, and so I'm gonna piss on everything they do. And it's just like, well, I don't know that that's any more Christian than, everyone else's political stuff. So
Yeah.
So I've talked too much. Where did you want this conversation to go? I just wanted to get some context, because otherwise people will now have a much better sense of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Well, one question I had is, so if you're in this space, one question I had for you, in this space long enough, you listen to all these conversations, and I think that the position or the framework that you might view certain conversations through is, oh, these are two good faith individuals having an open and honest conversation, which that's not a bad place to start. But when you listen for a long time, I think sometimes you can start to see, or if you talk to someone for a long time, like, oh, you're saying that you're like being objective, but actually a lot of it's built around maybe something that happened to you when you were a child or something like that, or maybe you're not as good faith as you think you are. So I'll use an extreme example. And this is absolutely my own, what do you say? Not prejudices, but my own allergies, I call them. Someone like Sam Harris, I'm like, that guy is not a good faith conversation partner. He has not come to his opinions honestly. Like he's has intellectual defenses because he has decided somewhere below the rational level, this is what I think. Maybe not, but that's at some point you got to be able to wonder if that's the case. And so that's one thing, you asked earlier, like what am I trying to do here, or what am I interested in this corner of the internet is even for myself getting below, okay, I'm saying I'm on this intellectual pursuit and whatever, but like, what am I actually like on the heart level up to? Or maybe the elephant in the ride or something like that. But I think the biblical language there, as much as it might be a little bit cliche, it really is like heart versus, external. So I'm curious, on your end, like, where do you feel like that comes in with intellectual pursuits and like these conversations that tend to be more intellectual? You as a pastor who has some language for understanding, like, okay, I know people might say one thing, but they got some, how do you navigate that? How do you see that? Where do you, I don't know.
Well, when I think about the question of what do we mean by a good faith conversation, I think about some of my colleagues that, let's say, I remember listening to a colleague. I was fairly new in Sacramento, and so that would mean I was, let's see, how old was I when I got here? I was 34 when I got here. I was quite new here, and I listened to this colleague talk, and he was a few years from retirement, and he was quite embittered, and he had regrets that he had entered the ministry. He mentioned that he really leaned hard. He told his son he should never enter ministry. And when I heard that, I wondered, can you in good faith preach? So there is very much an integrity aspect, and there's certain, it's also sometimes in preachers who they've got a pension, they've got a job, they've got a career, they've got a reputation, but inside they no longer believe. And I don't mean that they, are wrestling with doubt the way that we were talking before, but inside they no longer believe, but they put up an artifice, and they don't tell you what, to the best they can tell you what they think. Now, I like how you brought in the biblical language of heart, because that simplifies it. Now, I do have a consciousness Congress, and people can sometimes hear inconsistencies in what I say, and I I try hard not to speak. I try hard to speak in good faith. What that means is I try to, in a responsible way, be as transparent as I can about my own doubts and my own questions, while at the same time also trying to be transparent about deep-seated certainties and convictions. So part of what depth psychology and psychology in general has brought onto us is brought a deep uncertainty and insecurity with respect to whether there is somewhere within us a firm center that we recognize as the heart. Unlike, what you imagined earlier, where you have to sort of falsely screw up courage to chase doubt away. I think a better way is to look at the doubtful members of your consciousness Congress and say, yeah, I see you sitting there, but, and I know you're not going away, but yet here I'm going to let others speak with conviction. And I think that is the heart. I mean, you can't read the Psalms and even the Psalms that are attributed to David and not see that there are days when, he can scale a mountain and he can take on a lion. And another day he's like, where are you, oh God? Why have you abandoned me and let me fall prey to my enemies?
Yeah.
And I think God certainly knows that of us. And I mean, here's a conviction. Any maker of this universe, as filled with complexity and glory as this is, certainly can understand our common struggles with all of these things and can take them into consideration in our evaluation and in our sanctification. So, in other words, if we can see scale, God can surely see it far greater than we can. And so we ought not to, when Elijah was doubting after the showdown on Mount Carmel, part of what God knew he needed was a good meal and a good night's sleep. And, he set him up for, the confrontation of, I'm not in the storm, I'm not in the wind. Elijah, why are you here? He set him up to sit down and say, Elijah, why are you here? Because Jezebel has promised to kill me. And God says, after all of this, I have 7,000 who have never bent a knee to Baal. And I have someone waiting in the wings who will, in fact, inherit your mantle and want double the spirit that's in you. And he will do miracles at least as great as you are. So, and says almost the same, God says almost the same thing to Paul in Corinth. So, these are new challenges that we face as we have grown, I think, in our understanding of our humanity. But, and this is why we talk with each other, because I don't think these things somehow outflank God.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it definitely gives me something to think about.
I seem to be good at that, giving people something to think about.
Yeah, you do that for a lot of people every day for a couple hours. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, because I asked because it's been interesting, like Jordan Peterson, we'll just stay with him. So it's like, I've listened really closely because he's, is forever an important figure in my life, because even though we were only connected through the internet and he doesn't know who I am, he, in my own experience, he sort of helped rescue me from this existential dread of potential nihilism and all that stuff. So,
Yep. Yep.
but as I've watched him pay attention, I'll listen to one conversation he's having, like with Jonathan Pajot. Maybe it's my own biases, but I'm like, he's like at a super vulnerable place. He's exploring, and it just seems to be a very authentic conversation. Some of his most raw stuff. But then he'll have these other conversations where it's like, what do you like? And I only say this because he's a very good man. It's just the person I pay attention to a lot. It's like, why are you still fooling yourself? Like, why are you trying to like maintain this centrist position in American politics? Like, I mean, I can see why you're doing it, but it doesn't seem like you to be at that same central level of speaking from that same central level of yourself. And I'm not saying only because it's more intellectual, but someone like Peterson, or when he's like someone who's had experiences both with and without drugs, and then he's just obsessed with like trying to figure out how all this mystical stuff happened. It's like, I'm not saying he's not a good faith conversation. I think he's about as good faith as it gets. It's interesting with that example to see how we as humans still are trying to, what are we trying to do?
What are we trying to do?
Yeah, like, well, just what are we up to? We still, I don't, we're sometimes we try to make sense of things too much instead of just letting them fall as they may.
Yeah. He's, Peterson, my take on him is he is on a mission to help people. I mean, people will, whenever I put he did some, when I post commentary videos, they always go bigger than these conversations. And then I'll usually get the comments of, oh, he's a grifter. Why are you paying attention to him? And I've known a lot of grifters. To me, again, he does seem like he's acting in good faith, and he genuinely wants to help others. And he, I think with the psychedelics, he has the hope that, whereas in many ways the reproduction of his talks have certainly helped many people, he has the hope that the reproduction of a drug, could you administer a drug and then break people out of shallow materialism into, but then you'd have to, push him further. I mean, that's almost like the program that you deconstructed out of. Oh,
that makes sense.
Psychedelic plus, we're going to wrap it with services or something. Then suddenly we can now produce exactly what? Because billions of people in the world believe in God. We've got something going on in the West here in terms of skepticism, but I mean, the more interesting, I think, more profound questions have to do with as the betterment scales up. So now, thanks to his videos, thousands of people no longer suffer from the kind of nihilism in meaning crisis induced depression they were before. Oh, good. But what he's done in many ways is encouraged people onto a journey. Well, good. And many of those people are journeying into better things. They are reading the classics. They are exploring religion. They are working on betterment rather than sort of a falling back covered with Cheetos dust playing video games all the time. So he has made the world better.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about his case is, well, he had to deal with the drug withdrawal from the benzos, and he's, you might throw in the YouTube song, he still hasn't found what he's looking for. And I think we in the church can say, oh yeah, us too. But we might imagine that we have gotten a little closer, perhaps. And there's a sense in this that, is sort of haunts your story, where it it's sort of it's right there in the song Amazing Grace. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. How do you make progress towards the infinite? I mean, it's a and if you could on one hand throw your hands up and say, by definition, because it's infinite, I can't make progress towards it. But no, it seems you can, and it seems we do, and it seems that's what we want. So Jordan is, like us, someone who wishes to make progress towards the infinite, and we're comparing notes.
Yeah. I'd never connected that before of the psychedelics, obsession, interest, whatever you want to call it, to helping people. Like that makes sense, because, and that goes with, like, a lot of what you're critical of with Jordan, I would say constructively critical of, where it's like, why are you spending all this time on these culture war projects, when what brought people out of it, like, they came for the culture war, they stayed for the meaning. And it's like, there's something in Jordan that just can't quite connect those dots. It's like another book, another speaking tour. Like, that's great, but it's like there's something in him that can't quite connect. I don't even know what he can't connect, but these two things he can't quite connect. Yeah.
Well, we all have our journeys, and we all have our blind spots, and
Yeah, that's for sure.
And God, again, God does with us what he wills. And that can be both an exciting thought and a sobering thought and a terrifying thought. I I know I talk about my Calvinism, and that's part of the package here. And it's part of the reason people sort of recoil sometimes from Calvinism, because, well, that just makes God so sovereign and us so weak. Well, we are pretty small, and but it isn't determinism, and it isn't fatalism, because the God that we profess is a good God. And
Yeah.
so anyway.
Yeah. That's one of the, I talked earlier about how it's like, as I interacted with more and more Christian communities, it's like and then plus church history, I saw this connection of, all these disparate camps used to be one camp, but still have their own little things. And so it's like this thing you're always talking about with Calvinism has become such an important part of my life. And you see it in church history. It's such an essential part of the church, which is like this trust in providence, that everything has to be rooted in that rest. Or and back to Peterson, it's like, I don't mean to speak in evangelical terms, like, he just needs to whatever, but it's like, for lack of a better term here, it's like, unless you're rooted in some sort of providential rest, you're gonna drive yourself into the ground, because you can't take on that,
right,
that you can't save the world in yourself. So
you'll be susceptible to messianic aspirations, which these are God-sized problems, and it's to our meaningful delight that we can pursue them, but that should be done within a knowledge of God's, that its salvation is of the Lord. I think it's in the book of Jonah. I think it's a thesis statement of the Bible. Salvation is of the Lord. But again, that's a Calvinist talking. It's not our world to save. But no, I appreciate, there's some interesting parallels between, let's say, the psychedelic conversation and the charismatic conversation, because if we can, and reliably, if we can get the people into the room with the right sound and the right music and the right message, then we can pop them. And often they do pop, that's, but I think, what's interesting about your case is also that, okay, but all of that is insufficient. And you might say, well, insufficient for what? Well, insufficient for reaching infinity. And if you frame it in that way, then suddenly you realize that, okay, everything we have is insufficient for reaching infinity. And it is only the power of a God who can reach through that distance and bless us and give to us and bestow upon us, whether that's that's the sweet communion we embrace in worship, or in the Eucharist, or in fellowship, or in whatever way that he does so.
And on that note, as a shameless plug to the conversation John and I had on the Randos United channel, that's most of what we talked about. Is all this stuff is good and fine. So, but what's at the top of the hierarchy? What's at the top of that mountain? Because if it's meaning itself, as things you've talked about, like, is that enough? Is meaning itself enough? Or in the charismatic, is experiences with God enough? But it's like at the top in any Christian way of doing things, the top has to be Christ. Like, it has to be that the cross, the place of self-sacrifice, emptying yourself, which is exactly and things from that, things can be properly ordered and oriented, which is exactly what the point Barron and Pajot were making, is this whole thing Barron's been on of proper worship. It's like, or C.S. Lewis's properly ordered loves. It's like, if what you're headed towards is personal transformation, that's fine, but you better have an image for that personal transformation, which is to become the person who's willing to die for your enemies. That would be having Christ at the top.
Yeah. And I think I'd tweak that a little bit, in that the cruciform aspect of that is a function of this present age, in that when Jesus comes, the story of Jesus is fascinating if you buy his divinity, because divinity, when divinity comes to earth, we want to stop it. That is revelatory to us about how we are. At the top of the hill, the way up the hill, Peterson is right. You drag that cross up the hill. That's right in many respects. But what we're looking for at the end is, in fact, the consummation. It's heaven and earth being one. It's beyond the cross. The cross sets up resurrection and ascension, and resurrection and ascension, anticipate consummation. Right. And that's it's consummation. It's the joy of consummation that is like a tractor beam that grabs onto us through history. We are actually, I think in Christianity, we are actually pulled into the future by the presence of God, by the parousia, by his presence. And so when we taste that in worship, or we taste that in the Eucharist, or we taste that in fellowship, or we taste that, we can even, we taste it and we see it reflected in nature. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. There's infinity. The whole earth is full of his glory. His fingerprints are all over the place. And we find him, we find him reliably, but not in a way that we can grasp onto. It's so telling in, these little snippets of post-resurrection stories when Mary clings to him and Jesus says, don't cling. And part of that is, don't cling. I've not yet ascended to my Father. You can't hold on to me. And when, we go back to where we started in this conversation with that house of cards, in many ways, that let's get the worship right, and let's screw our certainty to get doubt from our mind, and all of that gets idolatrous very easily, because that's clinging to him. And he wants to keep telling us, it's not your grasp on me, it's my grasp on you. So open your hands and let me give it to you. And the one thing that I would want for Jordan is, in fact, stop clinging, keep searching. That's fine. Keep doing your science, keep exploring these frontiers as you are. But finally, our posture towards God is an expectant child asking our Father to give us good gifts. And, I think the charismatic movement gets so much of that right. And whereas orthodoxy, I love how you and others in the Discord have connected orthodoxy and the charismatics. What sort of differentiates them is time. The orthodoxy sort of looks at modernity and says, oh, what a bad wrong turn. Charismatics have kind of walked through orthodoxy and say, we care nothing for the orthodoxy of modernity. God is going to show up in the house and still the storm and raise the dead, and take your modernity and go someplace else. We don't care. Our God is bigger than that. And there's a faith and there's a posture towards modernity that, now there's certainly modernity built into the charismatic movement. You can't actually get away from that, but its posture towards modernity is always no. That's it's sort of like Jesus' posture towards Herod and the Romans. I was reading with our Bible study. We're going through the Gospel of Matthew, and everyone's all concerned about the Romans and the culture war, and Jesus often treats it like that's a small thing. Mm-hmm. That's a small thing. You're wanting to fight the Romans, and I see this in American politics. Oh, it's Trump. Oh, it's wokeism. And I think Jesus comes in and says, these are small things. These are, I'm not saying that there aren't problems with the Romans or problems with Herod, and Jesus will mention those things, but finally he says, those are small things compared to me, and keep your eye on me, and we'll settle this business with the Romans. Don't worry. And, probably not in the way you imagine, but in a far better way, which in fact he does.
Yep.
Oh. Yeah. I don't know. Have I talked you to death?
No, I think that was your hope for Peterson that you gave of the letting go. That was good. I appreciate you bringing that to this corner of the internet, this call, or this invitation to, hey, again, I know this sounds cliche, but like, it's all going to be okay, which is exactly what I need to hear sometimes. So,
it is. Yeah. And, I Jonathan Haidt talks about the cortical lottery. I mean, I had wonderful parents. I'm very low in negative emotion. I'm very high in openness. I'm extroverted. I'm a pretty happy guy. And so it's easy for me to believe it's all going to be okay. And I know it's considerably harder for a good many other people to believe it's all going to be okay. But I think that is at the bottom of the Christian message, is that. And I don't, critics they say, well, that disables people from working for justice or environmentalism or betterment, and I say not that the record does not demonstrate that Christians are somehow disabled from working towards betterment in whatever aspect you're convicted of. So so have we landed the plane, or you want to go more?
I mean, I could go more, but the one other thing I was going to say with what you were saying about Peterson is, and I was only using Peterson example of like certain observations I've made of like, what you pointed out of like, it seems like your main thing is this, but you keep going over here. I don't think he's not a good faith conversationalist at all. But it's so interesting. Like, and the reason why I brought that up is because even in myself, it's like, as Peterson has said of his personal story, like I'll catch myself saying things or engaging in arguments and stuff like that. And it's just like, what am I doing? Like, what exactly is going on here? So that's also what I'm trying to figure out too, why I'm here, is it's like, okay, and you asked me this in the charismatic conversation of like, what are you looking for?
Yeah.
And I would say more clearly what I was looking for is, when it came to matters of faith, is like, I wanted to find something that doesn't have a bottom, or, that you can keep going and it doesn't have an end, which is to your eternity thing that you were saying earlier, or the infinite.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just a small example of like, what exactly are we up to? Like, God, if I know, or whatever phrase Peterson uses, like, you don't know what you're up to. Yeah.
That's right.
So that's also what I'm trying to figure out here too, Paul, is like, what am I up to, man? What am I looking for?
We all are.
Yep.
Well, and I think with Peterson, I think his center is trying to help the individual. I think that is his center. I think, and I think he gets triggered by the political and the wokesters and all of that. And for Pete's sake, the guy lost 2 careers because of it. So I can't really blame him for wanting to, for getting triggered by that stuff and going down those holes. But I mean, what do we want for any good person wants for another is betterment and goodness. And so, and to the degree that we have found it in a way, we wish to share that with others. And so when someone who is a Muslim, looks at me and says, oh, I want you to know. And next week I'm going to have a conversation with a friend of mine local here. And he says, I want to do a conversation with you online where I'm going to try and, convert you to be Sikh. I was like, oh, okay, we'll do that. That'll be fun. And so we want to share the joy that we have with others. That's a good human generosity. And then we all have to figure out, usually together, well, can we have a better idea of betterment? Can that be improved?
Yeah.
And how do we pursue it together? So,
and that's why also, like, humility is, I think at some points was called like the chief Christian virtue, is because if you don't have humility, you're gonna impose too heavily your version of the good on other people.
Yeah.
So it's like, even with my desire to share what I have or to better others, it's like, if I don't have humility, it's going to be misordered. I'm going to do it wrong.
Yeah.
And to add to the point you were saying about how Peterson can maybe be overreactionary for good reason against those bloody neo-Marxists or something like that. It's like this cultural trend of like finding an enemy to latch onto, however legitimate it might be, So someone on Twitter like Neil Shenvi, his main thing is just pointing out, and he has a very even keeled, legitimate criticisms, and I think ultimately it's constructive and he's willing to engage.
Yeah.
But if you become so obsessed with that's like part of this narrative that you're in, and this is why on Twitter I might seem like I'm some sort of culture warrior sometimes. Trust me, I'm not, because in my real relationships, when I'm with more right-leaning people, I'm like, guys, you're going to drive yourself nuts. Like, I see what you're saying, but if you don't see your own need to sanctify yourself, you might look like the good guy your whole life, but you're not going to you're going to be part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so that's why, just in this whole, whether it be engaging real life with the culture war or intellectual discussions, like the best way really is humility. And that's why in like Bridges of Meaning, it's so nice to have some ladies in there, which is so rare for internet communities, because they're the ones who, when everyone else is like, what are they saying? The girls are like, hey, what's that mean? Or like, what do you mean by that? Like, they're not afraid. Humility comes more naturally, because so often it's like, I can't keep track of everyone's different words, and personalism is a new one. It's like, I can't keep up. But
well, for a lot of the women in this little corner of the internet, it requires that they be quite mature and secure in themselves, and to be able to just ask the honest question. And no, it's amazing, because the women are a small percentage of the Discord, but they are a powerful presence in many ways. They are the queens of the Discord. It wouldn't be the same without them, even though it's a very male space. So
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly.
Well, this has been lovely, Nick, and thanks for colonizing some of my consciousness Congress. And the truth is, I want to have conversations with a whole bunch of you, and it just I usually I trust actually that God brings these conversations in their time, and so I'm good with that.
Well, I'll keep messing with
Keep
you.
poking at me on Twitter and on the Discord, Nick.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Paul.
Great to talk to you. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.